Hello everybody, welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabaz, and if you've forgotten, I am the IT Geek. Welcome back to this SC300 Microsoft exam prep series. I am joined by my good friend Dwayne. Hi Dwayne.
Hey, Shabaz, how you doing today?
I'm very good, very hot. I'm sure I've mentioned that in the last 3 episodes because it's very hot in the
A
UK at the moment.
hot day and recording multiple episodes on the same day, so we've
I know.
got the same intro. Yeah.
If we were, if
It's still the same, still feel the same as you did before.
If we're really dedicated, Dwayne, we could actually change our t-shirts in between every episode, but we're not that
Yeah,
dedicated,
right.
unfortunately. Just to try and trick everyone that we're actually recording
Well,
them on
just
different
yeah,
days.
you let everybody know that we're not wearing the same T-shirts for multiple days in a row, so as well. So just to make sure that everybody's aware of our hygiene.
Yeah, full disclosure, full disclosure. So this is we're in module 2 now. We're deep into module 2. I believe this is the 4th episode in module 2, but this is the 2nd episode talking about managing user authentication. So let's get started. So you know who me and Dwayne are by now. So we're going to skip the introductions this episode. We will recap the introductions when we start module 3. But this is module 2 for now. Still a bit scared of these clouds, I'm going to be honest. But this is implementing an authentication and access management solution.
I always think when I think of scary clouds, I think about the cloud in Visio. When you started like doing diagrams in Visio, it was this black, like almost looked like a storm cloud. Every time I did a cloud diagram in Visio, I had to lighten the cloud up just so it didn't look so ominous.
Scary,
like something scary. It's like, no, we want people to move to the cloud. We want happy clouds.
Not sad, not dreary. I'll keep that one in mind next time I do a Visio diagram. Excellent. So yeah, we are on part 2 of managing user authentication. And here's, I mentioned it before, we're going to talk a bit more about Windows Hello and that as an authentication solution. Talk a bit about password protection and smart lockout, and then I'll hand over to Dwayne to do a demo on implementing password protection. So let's talk about implementing Windows Hello as an authentication solution. Okay, we all know how hard passwords can be. So what Windows Hello for Business does, it mitigates the following problems. Remembering difficult passwords. The amount of times, I'm sure, working on a service desk, you have a help desk, you have people ringing up because they've forgotten their password, you need to reset it. Obviously now we've moved on, we talked about self-service password reset, so we have less support calls, but yeah, it mitigates remembering difficult passwords. It also mitigates server breach, because it includes server breach protection, because server breaches can expose symmetric network credentials, which are passwords. So again, with Windows Hello for Business, it does mitigate that service breach because it adds that protection to it. We also mitigate replay attack. So replay attack occurs when an attacker copies a stream of messages between 2 parties and replays that stream to one or more of those said parties. So unless it's mitigated, the computer subject to the attack process, so it processes the stream of legitimate messages, resulting in a range of bad consequences such as redundant orders of an item. Okay, so with Windows Hello for Business, it mitigates that whole sort of process of replay attacks. Can you guess from that image what sort of attack I'm going to say now? Phishing attacks, yes indeed.
It's phishing with a PH.
Exactly, not with. Although the image I've put is phishing with an F.
Right.
So yeah, I just thought I try to be funny and comical with my images, failing a lot of the times. But so yeah, for Windows Hello Business,
we're both dads, so we come up with it's inherent that we come up with dad jokes, right?
I'm trying to avoid as long as I can. My older brother is the worst for dad jokes. Shout out to my brother. So yeah, the Windows Hello for Business also mitigates phishing attacks. Now, if those of us who worked in support areas, we know phishing attacks, what kind of email systems are subject to phishing attacks. So Windows Hello for Business does mitigate that as well. Just some key points on Windows Hello for Business. It is certificate based, so Windows Hello credentials are based on certificate or asymmetrical key pairs. Windows Hello credentials can be found can be bound to the device, and the token that is obtained using the credential is also bound to the device. Okay, so certificate base has always been a higher, more secure form of authentication. So that's one of the key points. An identity provider validates a user identity and maps a Windows Hello public key to a user account during that registration step. Example, providers are Active Directory, Azure AD, or a Microsoft account as well. These are kind of your examples of identity providers for Windows Hello for Business. So authentication is the two-factor authentication with combination of a key or a certificate tied to that device, as we mentioned, and something that that person knows. So again, we mentioned all that, something you know, being like a PIN number, for example, or something that person is. So that's the face, the finger, the biometric sort of stuff. The Windows Hello gesture doesn't roam between devices either, and isn't shared with the server. So key point there. Biometric templates are stored locally on a device, and the PIN is never stored or shared. Okay, so again, just adds that another layer of authentication security, then another layer of protection. The private key never leaves the device when using TPM. This is important to remember. The authenticating server has a public key that is mapped to the user's account during that registration process. Okay, so just another key point around Windows Hello for Business is that private key, and how it never leaves the device. Let's talk about PIN entry. So PIN entry and biometric gestures both trigger Windows 10 and later to use private keys to cryptographically sign data, and that data is then sent to the identity provider, Azure AD, on-premises AD, etc. The identity provider then verifies the user's identity and authenticates that user. Okay, so I use a PIN. I'm sure a majority of you people use PIN for their devices. Certificate keys can be protected by Windows Hello container and the Windows Hello gesture. So that's a single key container. Let's move on to talk about implementing and managing password protection now in Smart Lockout. So this is what we're going to see the demo of later. So let's talk about some of the principles with password protection. So there's no direct communication between domain controllers and the internet when you're talking about password protection. Okay. There's no minimum AD forest requirement, so it can be, it doesn't have to be a specific functional level to support password protection. Clear text passwords never leave a domain controller as well. Okay, so just important to remember that with password protection, clear text passwords all stay on the domain controller. There's not that dependency on the Azure AD features as well. So again, you don't have that dependency on the features and the licensing. And finally, you can enforce where the DC agent is installed. So as we're going to see, the password policy requires an agent, and you can specify where that's stored or where that's installed as well. So it doesn't have to be the domain controller; it can be another member server. Let's look at some of the components. Okay, so first component we have is what's called the proxy server service instance. So each Azure AD password protection proxy service instance advertises itself to the domain controllers in the forest by creating what's called a service connection point object in Active Directory. Component 2, which is the DC agent service. So each DC agent service for the Azure AD password protection also creates a service connection point object in AD. This object is used primarily for reporting and diagnostics. Component 3 is to download a new password policy. The DC agent service is responsible for initiating the download of the new password policy from Azure AD. First step is to locate an Azure AD password protection proxy service by querying the forest for that connection, that service connection point that we spoke about, that object in Active Directory. Fourth component is the DC agent sends that policy download request to the proxy. So when an available proxy service is found, the DC agent sends that password policy download request to that proxy service. The proxy service in turn then sends a request to Azure AD, and then it returns a response to the domain controller agent service. Talk about the fifth component, which is the policy is saved on the sysvol share. So after the DC agent service receives a new password policy from Azure AD, the service stores the policy in a dedicated folder at the root of its domain controller. So that is that sysvol share. DC agent service also monitors this folder in case newer policies replicate in the other domain control agent services in that domain. So you need to make sure that sysvol is monitored, and the DC agent does that. Component 6 is that the DC agent requests new policies at startup as well. So the DC agent service always requests a new policy at service startup, so if it's rebooted. After the DC agent service is started, it checks the age of the current locally available policy hourly. If the policy is older than 1 hour, the DC agent requests a new policy from Azure AD via that proxy service, as we previously described. So it goes back and completes that same process. If the current policy isn't older than 1 hour, the DC agent continues to use that policy as normal. Okay. So finally, seventh component: when the passwords change events are received by a domain controller, the cache policy is used to determine if the new password is accepted or rejected. So let's just quickly talk about Smart Lockout before we move on to the demo. So let's talk about how it works. So by default, Smart Lockout locks the account from sign-in attempts for 1 minute after 10 failed attempts. Okay. The account locks again after each subsequent failed sign-in attempt for 1 minute at first, and then longer in subsequent attempts. So the more you try and log in, the longer it locks for. To minimize the ways an attacker could work around this behavior, we don't disclose the rate at which the lockout period grows over additional unsuccessful sign-in attempts. Okay, so it doesn't tell you how long it's going to. So it could be 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute. It could grow by any amount. Microsoft don't disclose that. So Smart Lockout tracks the last 3 bad password hashes to avoid incrementing the lockout counter for the same password. If someone enters the same password multiple times, this behavior won't cause the account to lock out. Okay. Federated deployments that use ADFS 2016 and 2019 can enable similar benefits using ADFS, what's called ADFS extranet lockout and extranet smart lockout. Okay, so you do get that sort of integration for the hybrid federated deployments. And finally, we've mentioned this a lot of the times, but again, Smart Lockout does require Azure AD Premium 1 or higher, which is obviously Azure AD Premium 2. Dwayne, the heat has finally got to me. Can't talk anymore. I'm handing over to you, sir, to do the demo.
All right. So we're still in security as we were before. So we Azure AD security and authentication methods as we've used previously. Password protections in here. Now, you may have noticed in a lot of the Azure AD portals, a lot of these services are rooted kind of deep and embedded into a lot of these services. If I wanted to get to password protection rather quickly, I could just type password here, and you can see there's Azure AD password protection as well. It doesn't have to be rooted through Azure AD, through security. You can get there rather quickly. As with many of the services that are embedded in here, authentication methods, you can do the same thing. You can type that into the search bar. So don't worry about where it's embedded into, but worry about what the features and capabilities are. So as Shabaz had just mentioned around Smart Lockout, here's our protection, against kind of those brute force identity attacks, right? Where somebody's enabled a bot and it's got your username, just because our username is always our email address, and it's then just throwing a bunch of common passwords at the at Azure, trying to log in, or maybe they found a port 3389 that was open on a Windows server, and they're blasting it with these types of attacks. So if within 1 minute 10 attempts have been made with bad passwords, it's going to lock that account out. We can to keep our users from using passwords that are easy to guess, we can set up banned passwords. Microsoft already has a list of banned passwords, so you can't use password as a password in Microsoft. It is banned. But if you want to put a custom list, say like company name and things like that in here, you can create the custom list by selecting that here. Then here is where that password protection on the Windows Active Directory server takes place. And so you can enable that password protection. And you can see here's the deployment strategy and all of the deployment capabilities within here. And we can share this link with the as part of the video. You don't need to necessarily know hands-on on how to implement Windows Active Directory password protection in Azure AD, by step by step as part of the exam. But just note that there are certain steps that you have to take place, and Shabaz went through each one of those. I don't have it. I don't want to mess with. I'm not going to mess with my my particular environment by putting password protection on a Windows Active Directory server. But yeah, we can very easily do that by selecting yes and then going through all those configuration steps that Shabaz had mentioned. We can then enforce it, or we can just simply audit it as well. And we can see. And when we get into identity protection later on in this module, you can see where some of this takes place as well. I'm not sure. I'll have to double check my environment. I've launched a couple of servers that are kind of publicly known and generally get attacked in the environment from some of the workshops. So we'll see if I have any brute force attacks when we get to those modules. But again, this is going to keep you from getting hit by a brute force attack. The other thing that's going to help you is strong passwords and utilizing multi-factor authentication. So back to you, Shabaz.
Thank you, Dwayne. Another great demo there. Thank you very much. So yeah, we've covered again quite a bit of ground in this episode as well around passwordless and password protection. So passwordless is the last module. This one was password protection. So that does bring an end to the managing user authentication. There's a two-part episodes there, 2 episodes to cover that topic. So we are actually going to be moving on to talking about we have a third episode. So we have one more episode with managing user authentication, part 3. It's a 3-part topic, and then we'll be moving on to planning and administrating conditional access policy. I think that's gonna be my favourite one, if I'm honest, of this module. Again, all our socials are in the description. Please do reach out to us. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on LinkedIn. If you've got any questions, please feel free to comment on the video or tweet or ping us on LinkedIn. The link to Dwayne's book is in the description as well. That's very important. The SC300 book. Dwayne's obviously the author of that. I was lucky enough to be the technical reviewer of that as well. So please do buy it. Follow that book as we go along in this series, and also the link to the GitHub labs as well, so you can follow the labs as Dwayne's doing them. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Dwayne, as always. And up until next time, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks everybody. Have a great day.